Quality is not an act, it is a habit. Hello, this is the Quality Linked, brought to you by the Regional Network of Standard Setting Bodies, which make up the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality CROSQ. Every month on the Quality Link, we present one national standards body, NSB, to explore, discuss, or just give an update on how individual NSBs are supporting quality of life and business growth through standards, conformity assessment, and metrology.
Welcome to the Quality Link. I am your host for this episode, Marciano Busby, Communications Officer with the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards. In this episode, we will be taking a look at the Bureau's plan in spearheading the launch of a cannabis industry here in St. Lucia. To give us an overview, we will first speak to Mr. Verne Emmanuel, the Director of the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards.
Emmanuel, Director, St. Lucia Bureau of Standards. I've been from March 2018. I am a chemical engineer by training. I'm a registered professional engineer in St. Lucia and the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Today we will be discussing quality infrastructure and the changing regulatory framework for cannabis. St. Lucia Bureau of Standards has worked on the draft national quality policy through the Commonwealth Standards Network project. Our draft national quality policy covers all areas of our economy. The quality policy is the central tool which is used by governmental organizations to ensure the proper functioning of our quality infrastructure in an integrated and sustainable manner. SLBS, as the custodian of the quality infrastructure, ensures that we coordinate with all relevant stakeholders, including but not limited to the Ministries of Agriculture and Health and the private sector, to ensure that the economy functions in a sustainable and regulated manner in providing conformity assessment services, standardization services for the development of national standards, certification services, metrology services for both legal metrology and calibration services. We are an ISO 9001 certified organization, and we also have accreditation to ISO 17025 for mass and volume for our metrology department. We are advanced in completing the process of accreditation for 17020 for our inspection services. We have, through the development of our national quality policy, ensured a close working relationship with the Ministry of Agriculture, and in recent times we have fostered through an MOU and direct relationships the full operationalization of the National Agricultural Diagnostic Facility. This facility, which was funded through a grant from the European Union, will assist our agricultural sector in ensuring that farmers produce quality products from farm to fork. This will facilitate the ability of our agro-processors to have compliant products being exported into the both regional and international markets, and also guarantee safety for the produce and fresh produce being sold in our local markets. We believe that with the emergence of a new framework for cannabis as one of our key agricultural products, we will see the critical use of the National Agricultural Diagnostic Facility will support the work needed in ensuring a viable and sustainable cannabis industry. The new regulatory framework for cannabis has commenced with two enabling steps, which was one, the increase of the threshold for possession with intent to supply from 15 grams to 30 grams, and the additional measure of the provision of 4 plants for cultivation for individuals who are above the age of 18 and can possess 4 plants per household of normal cultivation.
So what is the task force doing now?
All right. So we're in the process of working through the Cannabis Task Force of ensuring the new cannabis regulatory framework. There are some significant measures which have taken place. One, the allowance of 30 grams of personal possession through the amendment of the cannabis regulations. So persons above the age of 18 can possess up to 30 grams on their person, and they can also cultivate up to 4 plants per household. The new cannabis regulatory framework will ensure that cannabis in St. Lucia will cater for all the permitted uses as required by the Single Convention on the Control of Narcotics. And so St. Lucia's regulatory framework will see the accommodation for medical, industrial, and research in cannabis. We see the full operationalization of the National Agricultural Diagnostic Facility in supporting farmers in ensuring that the cannabis products and other agricultural produce meet the necessary quality requirements for production, sale, and export.
Standards affect every aspect of our lives. Standards apply to goods and services that we consume every day. A standard is a set of requirements that must be met consistently to ensure that materials, products, processes, and services are fit for their purpose. International standards are created and managed by organizations like the International Organization for Standardization, ISO. ISO has developed over 22,000 international standards. The St. Lucia Bureau of Standards is a member of ISO and an affiliate of IEC. SLBS has developed 200 national standards and is in the process of adopting a further 500 standards from ISO IEC as national standards. Standards are important for consumer safety, competitiveness, and trade in goods and services. As a small island developing state, it is essential that St. Lucia has a strong regime of standards to drive growth in productive sectors and ensure the safety of its citizens and visitors.
This message is brought to you by the Commonwealth Standards Network.
So while many people share the possibilities of putting cannabis into an industry to strengthen our local economy, some people are more skeptical and reserved, even though they themselves are pro-cannabis activists. One such person is Marcus Day, who highlights some of the considerations that must be taken.
So my name is Marcus Day. I'm not on the Cannabis Task Force. I am the director of the Caribbean Drug and Alcohol Research Institute and have a number of positions. I'm the chair of the standards body for cannabis in our National Standards Bureau. And I am the secretary of the interim secretary of the Cannabis Cooperative, what we call the Herbal Cooperative, THC, that is being formed under the Cooperatives Act.
What are your impressions of St. Lucia's move towards decriminalizing cannabis and also making an attempt to actually begin an industry where cannabis is at its center, at its core?
Okay, so I think there's a number of issues, right, around cannabis and St. Lucia. And one is around equity. One is around reparations and the injustices that have been done to people over the last 20, 30 years. So when we talk about moving into an industry, I think the first thing we have to recognize is that there is an ongoing industry here. It is illicit, but nonetheless, it is ongoing and contributes to the economy. We have to integrate that, right? We have to, because in the legislation, right, we cannot disenfranchise those people whose daily bread is coming from cannabis, especially if we acknowledge the health and therapeutic values of cannabis. It's, you can't say, oh, well, those people are criminals. Well, those people had the foresight to be involved in cannabis well before you the state recognized the science around it, right? And the acknowledgments, even in the science, the acknowledgments of the traditional medicinal value that is often under-recognized by the scientific community, and that existed prior to the data that we have coming out of the 70s in Israel around the value of the endocannabinoid system in the body and how cannabis interacts with that. Let's, again, you have to make assumptions, right? So let's make an assumption that we legalize the sale of cannabis for personal use, right? In St. Lucia, you can just go and you can buy, and it's like alcohol. You can buy a case of alcohol, you can buy a bottle of alcohol. There's some age restrictions involved, but that's pretty much it, right? So in a situation like that, then you would have a cannabis shop probably in every hotel, right? And you'd have to supply that hotel. So there'd have to be some sort of supply thing. Because it's a regulated market, you would have to have standards, right? Something that we're undertaking right now, and have been doing at least on a ad hoc basis, even prior to the decriminalization, because we're looking forward to the need to make sure that what we put to the market is not harmful to people, right? So you would then have licensed growers, right? And not onerously, I don't think this $100,000 licensing fee that they have in Antigua, for example, or in St. Vincent is what we want to model after, right? But we do want to have licensing. We want to have input through, we propose through the cooperative. Part of the cooperative's duty is to educate its members, right? And so with a cooperative model where we bring the cannabis farmers together into a cooperative, work with them with technical assistance, extension officers to make sure that the crop, you don't want a crop that you're going to sell to inhale. You don't want them dusting it with 7, as an example, right? Which is a common agricultural product to get rid of mites and bugs and things like that. So these kind of things we need to make sure that we monitor. And then we think the cooperative movement, that the cooperative makes a very good between the farmer and the hotels and the purchasers, right? And so various types of cannabis, and then cannabis for export. But cannabis for export under the current convention regime is a little tricky, right? You can process oils here and export oils. Regarding hemp, I think we have to differentiate between hemp for fiber and hemp that's being produced primarily in America because it's low THC, and they have this thing about THC. And so they want to produce hemp plants that look exactly like cannabis plants. I mean, they're cannabis plants but they bred the THC part out of the cannabis plant. And I don't believe in that plan. I think that cannabis, the therapeutics involved with cannabis are directly tied to what is called the entourage effect, which is the entire plant and it works together. So when you extract a single molecule from that plant, you actually do it a disservice, and it's less therapeutic than using a whole plant extract, as an example. I think that the way the government earns their money in this whole deal is to come up with some cannabis tax stamps.
Wow, that got here in record time.
Global trade is about competence, customer service, built on a solid quality management system. Export is one way to grow your business. Come talk to the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards about getting on the international market. Call for 530049 Ask about certification and how it can bring you local and global success. SLBS, making quality and standards our way of life.
So because we're speaking cannabis, there are many legal implications and requirements that need to be addressed before the industry can be fully launched. So we sat down and spoke to Mr. Dylan Norbert Inglis, who is the legal officer in the Ministry of Commerce, and he is also the deputy chairperson of the Cannabis Task Force.
My name is Dylan Norbert Inglis. I'm the legal officer at the Ministry of Commerce, and I also serve as the deputy chairperson for the Cannabis Task Force of St. Lucia.
How do you see cannabis benefiting St. Lucia economically and in other aspects?
Well, we must appreciate firstly that cannabis is a $1 trillion industry. So persons often refer to it as being a multi-billion-dollar, but based on some calculations, we offer a wager that cannabis is more likely a $1 trillion industry. And if it is that we are to tap into what has been accepted as by some parties a $1 trillion industry, the expectation would be that there would have been great financial benefit to the country, firstly. That's just from a business perspective. You also have your medicinal benefits to individuals, given that cannabis has been seen to have great medicinal value. And that has been something that recently there have been a lot more research papers and peer-reviewed papers that have come out to evidence. So if it is that we are able to tap into the use of cannabis for medicinal purposes, there's also the medicinal benefit to the country, to the population of the country. And thirdly, we appreciate that there is, in the minds of some, a current crisis looming with the uninitiated and even the initiated using cannabis products in what we would see as an unresponsible way. So some persons who may not necessarily appreciate what they are consuming, how much THC is in it, the impact it has on the brain. These persons, if you have a better framework and industry, would be in a position to appreciate what cannabis is, how it impacts the body, whether or not they should be using cannabis, what are the risks for these persons of cannabis-induced psychosis, which is a possibility. And we don't want to see what has happened with other drugs, like alcohol, for example, happen with a cannabis industry, where persons do not appreciate what is really happening to their bodies when they consume. So if you were to implement a proper regime and it is no longer seen as taboo and just illegal, persons can now be duly educated on it. So these are the three prongs on which we believe that it will benefit the country to look in that direction.
What type of regulations will be put in place? For example, for somebody who wants to get into processing cannabis, will there be a license thing? Would there be a standard-based system?
Yes, well, regardless as to the stance that we as a country take with cannabis, internationally it's still going to be regarded as a narcotic. And because of that, we would have to fall in line with certain international conventions and treaties that we are signatory to, and certain international bodies who police those conventions. And as a result of that, you are going to ensure that if we do get involved in the cannabis industry, it would have to be strictly regulated. Because any involvement in what would have internationally be regarded as a narcotic must be strictly regulated and controlled within your space. So anything that St. Lucia would do towards the cannabis industry, which as I speak is currently being developed, and which has not yet been approved, no specific framework has been approved by the Cabinet of Ministers as yet for us to move forward with. We're still awaiting that final Cabinet approval, but I can wager to say that whatever is approved as the framework for it, and whatever form the framework takes and the industry takes, it will be a heavily regulated framework.
So what about a young person right now whose basic form of income is actually illegal selling of cannabis? When the regulations are brought out, what does that mean? Does that mean he would automatically be able to get a license? Would he be able to qualify?
No, you see, with regulations come standards. So whether that person can meet those standards or not would dictate whether that person can receive a license for them to sell cannabis or not. As much as you want to keep your industry as inclusive as possible, it must set a standard that is going to be at a level that any international body can look to the country and say, okay, you have put in place something that is practical in the circumstances, but also maintains the standard for a narcotic internationally. So we would have hoped that whatever framework government goes with would ensure that it is as inclusive as possible and allow for some of the persons who are currently involved in the industry to receive the option to become part of this regulated framework. But we also need to impress upon persons that the current manner in which they have been selling cannabis and the avenues by which they have employed for them to sell cannabis, they would not be able to do. So we cannot expect that somebody who is accustomed to hiding cannabis in a trash can somewhere and pulling it out to give to somebody in a piece of foil paper would be what would be licensed to do if there is an industry. Obviously, standards will become different. The packaging would be different. The means of sale would be different. Your recording would be different. But that is not to say that we are not willing to allow these persons, if they meet that standard, to be part of the industry. We are hoping that we can elevate all the persons to become part of such an industry.
Do you think it will be an easy transition for somebody or regular?
I cannot speak to how easy it will be until we have seen approval from Cabinet on what the framework is. We did have an initial framework that had been vetted by Cabinet and approved, but we as a task force have reviewed that framework and believed it necessary to resubmit to Cabinet some changes to that framework based on discussions we've had with stakeholders. So I cannot say how difficult or easy it will be to meet those standards until we have finished the framework, develop regulations, and then we can see how, if there is any scope for bending and how we can bend if possible. But even if we were to bend and yield in some cases, we also have to keep in mind that we have these international bodies and we have regulations that we have to meet. So if these persons, for example, if a current grower who derives an income from the illicit sale of cannabis and growing of cannabis wishes to be part of the industry, the product that he is growing, does he wish to export that product? And if he wishes to export that product, there is a standard he has to meet for the buyers internationally who have an interest in purchasing cannabis. So it's not just in St. Lucia saying that we're going to set in place standards which we think are going to be too onerous for you. It is us accepting that if you are going to grow cannabis, we need to ensure that you meet a certain threshold for THC, a certain threshold for CBD, that your plant is of a certain consistency, that all of these standards are things that you have to be able to meet if you want to export that product. And the hope is that they can receive sufficient support by other mechanisms that government may put in place to allow them to meet those standards. It is not a situation where we're trying to lower standards to allow persons through the door, but it's a situation where we're hoping that we can elevate persons so that they can come through the door.
Have there been any considerations to the use of cannabis or hemp within the energy sector?
Yes, there has been, not just the energy sector, but industrially on a whole. So we have, as a task force, also considered industrial cannabis and its benefits and uses and the industry that it could allow for. And it has also been part and parcel of the discussions that we have had and the framework that we have submitted to the Cabinet for approval.
One last question. What about somebody opening a shop within St. Lucia, maybe even a foreigner? Will certain legislation be there to guide, for example, if the company is based in St. Lucia, that's maybe the bank accounts that the company opens should be in St. Lucia, or a percentage of the profits remain in St. Lucia?
When you speak to bank accounts, you're touching on a very, very touchy subject. With, again, something that is internationally regarded as a narcotic, you have issues internationally. So we have already had discussions with some of our local banks to see how we can ensure that the industry we have in St. Lucia allows for them to meet the banking standards against money laundering and otherwise that they would have to maintain in order to keep the relationship with the outside banks that they have. So as we've been saying, it makes no sense to have an industry here. I want to invite investors and they can't wire money to St. Lucia because all the intermediary banks have determined that based on St. Lucia's industry, you don't want to touch the money coming from St. Lucia. And that is a real risk. So you need to ensure that whatever standards you put in place allow these international banks, who we have relationships with and through who our money comes to the country, that they feel comforted that the industry is above board, there is not high scope for money laundering, that all of the transactions in our country are being properly vetted, that there's sufficient know your customer, know your customer's customer, which the banks always allude to, and that all of these parameters satisfy these international bodies, so that when somebody who has a cannabis company in St. Lucia wants to go to a bank to form an account, they can do so, and their money can now be transferred to wherever they're from. If they're from Europe, if they're from the Middle East, Asia, South America, wherever they are from, that they have no difficulty with allowing for the transfer of monies back and forth. And that is something that we have had to contend with, and it's another reason that we have gone through painstaking deliberation to ensure that the industry meets those standards.
Any final words on cannabis and cannabis, its possible contributions towards the whole national quality infrastructure of St. Lucia adopting cannabis as a means to raising the standard of living for St. Lucians?
We want to ensure persons that as a task force and as a government, the intention is to develop an industry that will work. You have to balance a number of things to ensure that it will work, but we are fervently attempting to ensure that we develop an industry that will work. And in doing so, we have to beseech persons to be patient. A lot of persons are saying, why are we reinventing the wheel? Why not just go with what St. Vincent did or go with what a lot of other countries have done? You may not have the same factual matrix in your country to just take what someone else has done. So we've seen what California has done. That may not be transferable to St. Lucia. We've seen what Canada did. That again may not be transferable to St. Lucia. And you have a number of other countries who have a framework that may work for them, and in some cases isn't even working on the ground for them. And we've seen some of the teething pains that they have had, some of the issues that they have had. Nobody has had the benefit of being able to boast that they have a perfect industry. And we, likewise, may not be able to get it perfect. But I often say, and permit me, if you're going to be late to the party, you should be best dressed. So we're trying to ensure that whatever industry we develop allows us to be the best dressed at this party. And we should be the beacon in the world in cannabis industries when we're done with what we're trying to develop here.
You've invested lots of time and money into your business. Your customers place their trust in you. Don't take them for granted. You want your customers to keep coming back. The St. Lucia Bureau of Standards is there to guide you on training and the certification needed to give you that competitive edge. It is more affordable than you think. Call the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards today at 453-0049. SLBS, making quality and standards our way of life.
We have come to the end of this episode of The Quality Link. We hope this episode was informative, educational, and enlightening. Stay tuned for more episodes.
This has been a production of the CROSQ's Marketing, Information, Knowledge Management and Education Committee. Join us next time for another episode of The Quality Link.